Welcome to the Psychedelic Mindscape, a podcast that delves into two fascinating topics: psychedelics and leadership. I'm your host, Victoria Lauren, and today I'm speaking with Jess Jorgensen, an insights person who is really into mushrooms. Her company, Running with Mushrooms, partners with visionary businesses to inspire the products, services, and systems capable of transforming people and the planet. She blends a strategic expertise and the world of mushrooms, their biology, their culture, their organizational structure, creates frameworks for new ways of thinking. Jess spent 16 years working as a director of strategic and cultural insights with agencies in London, Cape Town, and Johannesburg, helping brands understand people and culture. Now, Jess is merging the worlds of insight and mycology by launching a futures company powered by nature. Welcome, Jess. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Victoria, and thanks for the amazing intro. I am really excited to be chatting with you today as a fan of your podcast. So, yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I would love to just kick off with asking you, because in the bio, about you, what I left out was this period of time that you took off, a little bit of this career break as you transitioned from market insights to this now, running with mushrooms. So I'd love to know just how you chose to leave market insights and what kind of inspired you to pursue this passion for mushrooms.
Geez, a big place to start. Okay. So there are a number of things that sparked that decision. Just to say, first up, I think the biggest part of it was that leaving a great job wasn't necessarily about running away from anything, but rather about running towards something. And that something was mushrooms. So um, I grew up in the mountains. I grew up in a very natural environment. I was very lucky to be very connected with nature pretty much my whole life. I spend a lot of time in nature. I love nature. I love hiking, despite the fact that I live in London. Um, Working within an urban environment in a city for an agency was great, and made up the majority of my adult career. I started working in agencies more than 16 years ago, and left at an amazing director level position. Um, the three core kind of drivers to leaving the agency world were well-being, morality, and motivation. So well-being essentially was all about not necessarily dealing with burnout, but really wanting to live a more balanced lifestyle. To work equally with my hands as well as my head. Being an insights person and a cultural strategist, a lot of your work is, as we are now, like at a laptop, at a computer. I really want to rather get grubby in a forest. I want to grow and nurture my own food. I want to do field research in an actual field. you know. So it's just about having a better balance of working with your hands and working with your head. In terms of morality, gosh, this is a deep one and something I'd love to write a book on one day. But I think we're living in this era of such a profound, like, human influence on nature. And just from an ethical perspective, it was just becoming difficult to justify working with big brands who quite often are coming from a place of extractive capitalistic intentions, unsustainable business practices, and those sorts of things. And I don't want to be a hypocrite. I'm a consumer of things. I like things. I like to eat and to drink and be merry and buy stuff. I love Netflix. But I felt that, working for capitalistic gain doesn't have to feel soul destroying. Essentially, like, another motivation towards leaving the agency world was wanting to learn better ways of working from fungi and from nature, I think that nature can really influence us as society and humans to design better systems or better business strategies, better corporate structures, just better ways of working. And I wanted to explore that. The third sort of thing that I mentioned was just motivation. So I think, like, as I'm sure you've experienced in your own work, and we've talked about this before, but when you're passionate about something, your motivation is intrinsic. Like, you can't compare it to external rewards like money or status or whatever. And I found just doing something that I'm passionate about just makes me really happy. It's satisfying.
Yes, I definitely hear you on all of those things and couldn't agree more. It's interesting to me because it sounds very reminiscent of my experience of leaving the corporate world and then, moving into the leadership coaching space. And I think it was that same kind of, I was in healthcare, which on the outside has this really beautiful, like, oh, we're saving lives, we're helping people, and I do think that that is something that healthcare provides, and I am a fan of medical advancement and technology and the things that capitalism affords us. And at the same time, when I looked at the internal culture, it was very, as you said, extractive. It was very focused on what are the numbers, what's the revenue, um, rather than focused on, doing what's right for the patient. And so that created a bit of a tension and struggle within me and sort of motivated me to say, I think it's time to go down a different path and to find that thing that is intrinsically motivating to me, so that you know I think that you can still run the risk of burning out even when you're working in something that is intrinsically motivating if you don't take the time to decompress in nature and find that appropriate balance. But yeah, that all really resonates with me.
Totally.
So
I love hearing your story. And as I've been sort of talking about my journey over the last year, it's just amazing how many other people, women in particular, have reached out to me, but men as well, but like particularly women have reached out to say, "Hey, I'm on a similar journey," or "Your journey has inspired my journey." And I'm just encountering so many incredible individuals who are ditching great corporate jobs for something more in line with their values or their passions, and I think it's just beautiful.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
all for it. I'm all for it.
I am too. I am too. I always like to say to, because I do end up with a lot of clients that are interested in that specific transition of, okay, I've been working in this one industry my entire career. I want to make a change, but I feel like I don't have the expertise. And it's almost like it's more a lack of not giving themselves permission and trusting that they can lean into that unknown and that there will be something on the other side to meet them.
Totally. And we've also been conditioned to have this horrible imposter syndrome wherever we go. Like, I had the same thing. I am not a mycologist. I'm not a scientist. I'm a researcher, but I'm a researcher of people and behavior and culture. I'm not a sort of academic researcher. I could never afford to go to university. So I have no tertiary education. And, ideally, my dream job would be getting my hands physically grubby, like doing ecological research, like in a field, and doing, like, you know, things that involve investigating fungi in a forest, and how mycelial systems work and all those sorts of things. But I don't have an academic or scientific brain. And I find there are just that world just doesn't feel as if it's open to me in the same way. So I've instead taken a passion for mycology and mushrooms and approached it as an enthusiast, a humble enthusiast with so much to learn. And I've applied the skills of 20 years of research practice as like that person who just asks a ton of questions. And I just go around speaking to mushroom people, and I'm like, "Hey, will you answer all my questions about mushroom culture?" Like,
Yes.
that's what I do because that's all I know. So I've, and I would encourage other people to do the same. We can all apply something to the thing that we're passionate about.
Yes, exactly. And even, I mean, I think that also a lot of people get obsessed with this idea of, well, I have to go to school or I have to get, a certification. I have to go through this program in order to make this change. But just as you're saying, I have found as well that just arriving with a sense of curiosity and a willingness to ask questions that other people might, be thinking like, oh, that's kind of a silly question. But you get a pass, like you're the new person and you can say, hey, I don't understand this, I want to know more about it, can you tell me? And people love to share their knowledge and their stories.
I totally resonate with that. And one of the biggest things that I've learned doing this mushroom tour, I mean, I counted just before today to make sure I got the number right, but I've interviewed 67 mushroom people in 5 countries in the UK, in Southeast Asia, and in South and Eastern Africa. And it's been incredible. And one of the biggest things I've learned is just how willing mushroom folk are to share and to connect. And that whole idea of, um, yeah, people just being like super passionate about the potential for mushrooms and working with mushrooms and understanding fungi, whether it is from a psychedelic assisted therapy perspective or through in the applications for the environment and microremediation, etc., or if it's about food sovereignty or food products, or if it's about health, if it's about like beauty, functional mushrooms. I mean, the applications for fungi and working with fungi are so huge. But no matter which space I've been investigating and talking to people, everyone has just wanted to share. And I love that. It's
That's
such a great,
beautiful.
like, open source, like citizen science driven community of people who are just really cool.
That's amazing.
I'm loving
Well,
it.
I'm going to jump to this pretty big question then. So you've got 67 people, 5 countries. If I ask you, what did you learn from talking with them? I know that's a huge, huge question, but that must have been so fascinating. And I'd love to just, share with the audience, what were some of the things that stood out to you?
Yeah, big question. And in fact, Tori, that question overwhelms me because as a researcher, I haven't had time, frankly, to do the diligence of actually like fully analyzing everything that I've learned and organizing the information. And as a strategist, I can't rest until things are neat. But
Yes.
I have learned a number of things, and I'm just going to do a small plug here, but I am slowly sort of looking at some big themes, some big tensions that I've observed in different facets of mushroom culture. And I'm putting together sort of little like spore reports, just little reports that kind of dive deep into these topic areas. The first one that's coming out soon is called Mushrooms Have a Branding Issue. And it's all about the functional mushroom industry, how it's booming, yet the sort of risk of boom to bust with lots of new brands. I mean, hundreds of new functional mushroom products available to just consumers in the UK, targeting lots of audiences, but those audiences still have lots of blockers to overcome. And as a mushroom person, I don't like that. I want people to overcome their blockers and just take mushrooms. But I've done consumer research as well as all the research with people who are actually working with mushrooms. And the people I've interviewed who are, I would call them mushroom curious. They're not like rejectors of mushrooms in any way, but they have blockers. And there are certain things that brands are going to need to overcome from a branding perspective to kind of address those blockers and to help people navigate this category and to help it grow in the right way.
Just a quick question for you. Yeah, with the word you're using, blockers, are you thinking of that in terms of like the stigma that is attached to mushrooms and, kind of extending from mushrooms to psychedelics as an entire category?
Yeah, good question. So the report will dive deep, deep, deep into all of the blockers that I found. I know we probably don't have time to go into all of them today, but some of them are um, quite practical, just around use cases, a lack of education around what the ingredients are in certain functional mushroom products, how to use them, how to use tinctures or powders or, those sorts of things. I mean, um, a classic example was one of the consumers that I interviewed um, was looking at some functional mushroom packaging that I used as stimulus from a well-known brand available in the UK, and the person was like, a lion's mane. Okay, I don't understand what that is or what to do with it. And I am of African or specifically Zimbabwean heritage. And I actually just associated with like witchcraft. Like, why is this thing going to turn me into a lion? What is it going to do? I don't get it. And that was an extreme example, but pretty much every person that I interviewed was mushroom curious and have a base level of understanding that mushrooms are good for you, but they don't necessarily know the difference between reishi and cordyceps and lion's mane and chaga and tremella, etc. Um, and so there's a little bit of overwhelm and a sort of lack of education about what the ingredients are. The other big blocker I found, which is a bit meatier and might overlap with the psychedelic industry, and that is just around the unfortunate but yet interesting and prevalent narrative of pseudoscience.
Hmm.
And so this is a meaty topic, and I'm not sure if we should dive too deeply into it. My report will dive into it in more detail, and I don't want to get into trouble today.
Share what you can.
I mean, the short story is, and this is just coming from my analysis of conversations with people who work within the industry, as well as I say, consumers who aren't as close to it as people like you and I might be. There is a sort of sense that yes, mushrooms are good for you, 100% psychedelic. All the research that is going on right now is sort of helping Western consumers understand the benefits through the lens of how we understand Western medicine and science. And I know this is a podcast, so you can't see my fingers doing the kind of quote unquote thing, but the science that is proving these benefits that have been known by other cultures around the world for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So there is this idea that functional mushrooms are good and psychedelic medicine is good, but Western science is really just kind of catching up to what ancestral wisdom and knowledge has always known. And so while Western consumers are waiting for that validation, I think there is a small danger in that lots of companies and brands in both the psychedelic arena and functional mushrooms are just forging ahead and releasing every type of product you can imagine or service you can
Mhm.
imagine because it's interesting and it's trendy and it's, you can make money out of it. So there is a lot of overclaim from brands and products, and I feel like a lot of stuff is happening before the science has had a chance to kind of really establish itself in the way that Western consumers often need to avoid accusations of things like pseudoscience. Um, and so, yeah, so there's an interesting tension there that I find came up in a lot of facets of the mushroom industries and cultures that I was exploring.
Yeah, that is really interesting. One of the conversations that I've been having with several people that I'm sure you might have a take on this as well is, kind of how you alluded to the fact that these are medicines that have been worked with in indigenous settings for thousands of years. There's a long history and a lot of sacred knowledge there. And then Western science is coming along and trying to take, our deductive approach to proving that something has value, and we're saying, oh yes, it's safe, it's efficacious, and these are the indications for use. And I think that sort of work is important, especially when it comes to acceptance in Western cultures, um, and that there's something that each can kind of teach the other. But some of the things that I hear are a lot of this, like, well, we don't want big pharma to come in and take this up and turn it into just something that is completely driven by revenue and capitalism. And I understand where they're coming from. And at the same time, coming from the healthcare industry and having worked with big pharma companies, I'm also thinking about it in terms of, well, would it even make sense for a pharmaceutical company to take on this type of drug? Because you look at things like antidepressants or SSRIs, this is something that people take on a daily basis, regularly throughout many years. Whereas here we are with psilocybin saying, oh, come and have this one mystical experience, and then you'll be feeling pretty great for about 6 to 12 months, which, from a business use case perspective is like, yeah, that doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that is, I have had conversations with people where that idea is quite hard to grasp, and to understand. But I mean, you could also argue on the plus side that, I mean, I can't speak too much to big pharma. I don't have the um, medical or sort of health experience, but certainly from a perspective of functional mushrooms, which are being used as supplements and supportive, and not necessarily claiming to treat illnesses, etc. So they're more, as a supportive function. You could argue that big companies kind of, jumping on this mush wagon, as I like to say, is it has its pros and its cons. There, as you can imagine, I'm sure not all people are comfortable with kind of venture capitalist backed businesses just kind of, stepping in and saying like, oh, let's capitalize on that and appropriate some mushroom stuff and make a product and sell the shit out of it. Great, it's all for profit. Fine, that's okay. I think it's sort of the plus side of that is that those companies may be helping to create a market and to, generate awareness, to get more mushrooms to more people. And so that can't be a bad thing for smaller businesses who have done a lot of the work in actually establishing this industry from the ground up. On the other side, you could argue that some of those, bigger companies are not necessarily engaging in the best sort of types of business practices that we would hope. Um, we can't be sure that there is, for example, transparency on the packaging around,
Right.
what's actually inside this product that you are ingesting. Is it the fruiting body of the mushroom or is it the mycelium? Is it mycelium that is grown on a specific type of grain? Is that substrate coming from an organic production process? Has the product been lab tested? Third party, do the raw materials use pesticides or heavy metals? Are companies transparent in their production and ingredients? Are they using local fungi species or strains, or are they introducing all sorts of new species into the natural environment? There are so many questions. it's overwhelming. But I think all we can do is hope that consumers will be discerning enough about what they choose to put in their bodies and do their own research and do their own due diligence, um, about what they buy and what they ingest.
Yeah, I feel like that is best case scenario though, right? I feel like there's so many people that they would just look at the packaging and say, oh, functional mushrooms, adaptogens, great, I've heard that these are all good for me, and then go for it. But just to comment on like the regulation and control, because the supplement industry, there's no like overseeing governing body that's keeping tabs on quality and supply chain, and looking at those types of things that you would have in the case of a drug development company or something that, was being approved by the FDA for the United States specifically, to be released. And I think that's important for people to keep in mind, is that okay, perhaps you might have some concerns about big pharma getting involved because of, oh, they're just out there to make money. And, fair enough. And at the same time, I feel like, well, if you want to have a consistent product that is tested and exactly, where it's coming from and how that's working, which of course, most of the drug development things that are happening right now, that's all with like a synthetic psilocybin. But there is a company in Canada that I'm really fascinated by, called Filament, who is trying to do extracts. And so they're trying to keep, it's still like in its more natural form, but they are trying to approach it from this, well, we want to have it standardized, and we want to know exactly like what is the potency, what's the recommended dosing. And I feel like that company is at an interesting intersection where they're operating like a drug development company, but the product that they're creating is, I would say, maybe more similar to something that you would see with supplements that are trying to kind of stay true to the roots, or true to the mycelium.
That is very, very interesting, Tori. I'm going to go look up filament. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, you're welcome. Well, I wanted to see, just kind of switching gears, and we've talked a lot about what you called the mush wagon, and I've heard you refer to it as well as the shroom boom. But I'm thinking about just, I had heard you talk about mushrooms in terms of being an ally and a teacher and a friend, and really, thinking of them as more as partners rather than something that you're just using or benefiting from. And I wanted to know how you bring this into your business practices, or your own strategies.
Um, Thank you so much for asking that, because something that really resonated with me during my research and having these amazing conversations with such incredible people doing very, very interesting research and work within mycology, was the idea that, well, I mean, I'll take a step back, apologies, but as an individual, one of my core kind of icks is that idea of extractive capitalism, or just purely for profit, purely for individual gain. And one of the things that draws me to mushrooms is the idea of partnering, not co-opting. Um, and what really resonated with me was the idea of, not thinking completely in the lines of what can mushrooms do for us, but rather what can we do for the mushrooms? Can we work in a way that is reciprocal? And so that those sorts of ideas are the ideas that I'm starting to bring into my business practice and into strategies when I work with brands or companies in terms of their own business practices. I'm trying to foster a culture of partnering, not co-opting. And I can give some examples of that if it helps.
Yeah, that would be lovely.
So this idea of like for the funga, like rather than just focusing on how mushrooms can benefit us, we need to also consider how we, as in companies, brands, people, can support and nurture the mushroom ecosystem. So rather than just engaging in relationships that are purely extractive, or co-optive or appropriating, can we involve or sort of create sustainable cultivation practices, for example? Can we protect wild mushroom habitats and really think very carefully about the impact of species, um, um, excuse me, I've lost the word now, but introducing non-native species into ecosystems or habitats? Can we invest in mushroom research and education, for example? What in an individual or company or brand capacity, what can you do for the mushrooms to ensure that it's a sustainable and reciprocal practice?
So kind of thinking about like if I were a functional mushroom brand and I'm sourcing mushrooms and various things for the product that I'm marketing, then am I thinking about sustainability? And maybe that's in terms of packaging, but maybe that's also in terms of like regenerative agriculture. Is that kind of on point?
Yeah, so yeah, that would be one area of it, would be sort of sustainability focused, for example. I'll give an example of a company in the UK, who I think they're great. They're called Bristol Fungarium. I just have to say, so that I don't upset anyone, Bristol Fungarium are just one, but there are so many amazing companies in the UK doing great things like this. So they're offering medicinal tinctures, and I think they're one of the only companies that not only are their products organically grown, and sort of bottled on site. There's no footprint from um, um, you know importing like powders from somewhere else in the world, but they're also the first to make the entire supply chain like short and transparent. Um, they talk they know exactly where their mushrooms originated in the wild in the UK. So they do this by very carefully foraging for interesting species, and they'll take like a bio it's not a biopsy. It's not a sample. There's a
Sure.
take a sample, take it back to the lab at the farm, clone these species on agar, and then fruit them themselves. So they are doing, they are using native UK strains in a very sustainable way, and also growing their produce on like sustainably sourced sawdust and organic wheat bran and those sorts of things. And I think that's great. That's one way that a company can be um, sort of sustainable. But when I talk about reciprocity and partnership, I think it's bigger than that. The way that I've been applying these sorts of practices to my own strategy or business practice is in how you work with other people or entities. And it sounds so basic, like partner with people, don't co-opt, but I'm still amazed and appalled at how many examples I see, even just within my industry, where relationships are extractive, relationships are about co-opting. The research industry that I'm involved in talks about tapping into consumers. Do you know what I mean? It's never reciprocal, it's never mutually beneficial. And I think we can really learn a lot from fungi. Um, Fungi form mutually beneficial relationships with plants. We can learn from them. They're sharing nutrients, they're exchanging things, and this idea of resource sharing, mutualism, like the practice of sharing benefits, can be applied to brands and companies and organizational structure and how we work together as people. Um, so yeah.
I love that. Yeah, that's beautiful. Any others that you wanted to share? You looked like you might have
Oh, well,
more.
I've got to decide where to stop, Tori, because there's a lot. I mean, there's so many amazing things that I've learned through through working with mushrooms. Maybe choose one. How about this? I'll give you another three, and you can choose one.
Ooh, okay. Okay. I'm ready.
Okay. The first one is process, not things. Second one is interconnectedness. And the third one is decentralization.
Oh, I'm leaning towards interconnectedness. Tell me more about that.
Okay, great. And so I think this is okay. I will answer the question that you asked about how um, to integrate this within business practice in general. Um, and I think this might also just apply to the corporate world. Like,
Perfect.
what could we learn? How could we implement it? Um, so interconnectedness or a network structure, as I'm sure most people who work with mushrooms or mycelium will know, mycelium grows by forming these intricate and extensive underground networks. Um, the wood wide web, I'm sure you've heard, and there's this idea of connecting the roots of plants and trees and allowing them to share nutrients and water and information in this ecosystem. It's like a cooperative community, which is pretty cool.
That's very cool.
Very cool, right? Rather than the types of hierarchical, siloed structures that we often find in organizations. So, a nice way to think about this network structure as it might relate to how a company organizes its teams is to thinking, I mean, we've all heard about like flat hierarchy, for example. I think that's the base level of how to encourage open communication and collaboration and the sharing of knowledge and all that kind of thing. But can you take that a step further and create an interconnected kind of network structure of cross functional teams? Um, so, like, instead of a traditional functional structure, a company could organize its teams around these like cross functional pods, for example, rather than traditional departments. And maybe each pod can include, okay, I'm just thinking of it like a software company. I don't know
Sure.
anything about software development. I don't know why that came to mind. Maybe because I've been doing a lot of AI research lately. And that includes artificial intelligence as well as ancestral intelligence, by the way. Um,
I
but
like that.
thanks. But no, so the idea of sort of cross-functional teams in a say like an AI innovation company, could you include developers and designers and product managers and other roles that are needed to deliver a specific product or feature? You've got that group of people within each pod, but the pods are empowered to make their own decisions. It's decentralized, just like a mycelial network is. Um, they are empowered to coordinate directly with each other rather than deferring to like central management hierarchy, for example. Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that be
That would be amazing. Can I actually interrupt and tell you a story?
please?
Okay. Okay, because this is really speaking to me. So the last corporate job that I had, I'll give them kudos for having this kind of style of network, right? Like I was working in product management, and I had my department, which was all of product management. But then there was a particular medical device that we were bringing to market, and so me representing product joined a team of the quality engineers, the manufacturing engineers, the product development engineers, and regulatory people. So we had this group that had all of the various departments represented, and we were working to bring something to market. Where it does not align with the vision that you have painted is that it was empowered. That was lacking. So any decision that we made, right, it had to go up the chain. It had to be formally approved by VP level. After that, went to CEO and CFO, got approved at that level. And I will tell you that there were major roadblocks that we hit and along the project. And there was a recommendation that the entire cross-functional, interdepartmental team had made, saying, you know what? I think we might need to go back to the drawing board on this particular aspect because we need to gather more information. It's not, doing what we want it to do. And went to the executive team making that recommendation, who then came back saying, no, you're going to move forward. And everyone on the team said, that's a really bad idea. We would like to take a couple more months. But again, it's that whole drive for revenue. And so all that the executives were looking at was, well, this is our deadline, and this is when we need to be making this revenue by, which means you need to launch ASAP. And it just gave me a lot of insights into the culture. And I'm just thinking to myself right now that had I been there with that empowerment to make a decision as that cross-functional team, it would have ended up saving a lot of money, a lot of heartache, a lot of time in the long run. And it also just would have been the right decision.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, my heart was just kind of breaking bit by bit as you as you carried on with that story, because I feel that I I believe that the example that you've shared is just incredibly common, and understandable in service of profit of, you know. So yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I genuinely hope that that all of the incredible voices that are speaking within the world of fungi right now. And there are many, there are so many, and there are so many great thinkers who are looking at how to apply natural systems to how we operate, not only in terms of like organizational structure, but also in terms of how brands can implement strategy, or in terms of even bigger things like how we design communities, and how we live. And I, we don't have time to get into all of it because it's just, there's so much. But I do hope that that paradigm starts to shift.
Ah, I hope so as well.
And maybe it's up to people like you and I to make it shift. Sorry, I'm just adding that in there.
I love that. I love that. Yes, that's a beautiful call to action. Well, I really appreciated just the insights and getting your perspective, Jess. I really would love to have you back on just to kind of, once you've gotten the report out there and have had time to review the data and feel good that you can, represent those lessons. Because, you gave us some really awesome little sneak peeks. But from here, like, where can people find you? Where can they, get in touch with you and just kind of stay tuned?
Um, well, yeah, thanks so much, Tori. I'd love to come back, and chat with you and share more learnings. In terms of how to connect, I mean, all the usual. Actually, no, not all the usual platforms. I'm terrible at social media. I do have. I keep forgetting that I have social media platforms, and I need to hire someone to force me to use them. So I'm on Instagram, running with mushrooms. Also on LinkedIn as Jess Jorgensen, myself, or the company Running with Mushrooms. And then runningwithmushrooms.com is where I house my blog, that has been documenting some of the stories and some of the learnings that I've found on the mushroom tour. I have a huge backlog, and I'm so grateful to everyone that I've spoken with. For their patience as well, because I'm getting to them one by one, in and around life, and needing to sort of earn a living. So you can find my blog, and I also have my own podcast, although I have only released 5 episodes, despite having 60 something to get through. So big backlog there. So runningwithmushrooms.com, Instagram, and LinkedIn would be the main platforms. May I add one thing to that,
Yes, of
if
course.
you don't mind? I'm really on the lookout for great thinkers to talk about this stuff with as well, because in the interest of partnering with fungi and learning from fungi, I'm really interested to speak with other people who are also doing similar investigations. I feel like we can share notes. And so if this is you or someone that you know, if there are people that you know who are sort of looking to challenge the status quo, whether it's in consumerism, business operations, brand strategy, culture, or organizational structure, please reach out. I'd love to chat and to share notes. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Okay. Calling all mushroom researchers, anyone else interested in this area, please get in touch with Jess. Well, thank you so much. And thanks for spending your evening with me. I
You're
hope
very
to talk to you
welcome, Tori.
soon.
And I'm also conscious that, for the Psychedelic Mindscape podcast, we didn't talk much about psychedelics.
Okay, that's okay. It ends up going, wherever the conversation goes. And I was just really happy to talk about mushrooms and what we can learn from them and how that might apply to things like organizational culture. I think that's incredibly relevant. So that's no worries.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.